Across the board, I have found that an issue that continuously seems to hold me back is my ability, or lack thereof, to improvise and to just go with the flow and be in the moment. I think much of this is due to my own reservations and feelings towards looking stupid or looking as if I don't know what I'm doing. For example, in some of the exercises we've done in class, such as there's the ball game where you throw a ball and someone else catches it and the ball can become whatever they want it to be, or the one in which we all have to jump into the centre at any given point and swap places with someone, but we have to go back into their position and then become something entirely different to what they were. During these exercises, I just found myself freeze up and step back a bit and just become overwhelmed and unable to do it, because I just couldn't think that quickly, and I wasn't ready to, and I just felt myself enjoy what I was watching but not want to take part in it at all. But actually, having done the research, I've realised that there are so many different approaches that can help me actively get rid of this fear and be able to improvise and be able to let go and be in the moment. I quickly came to the realisation that in order for me to be able to improvise or to go with the flow of something that has no real structure, that I'd have to use my imagination a lot. Stanislavski said that art is a product of the imagination. So if I can't use my imagination, then I can't create anything. So instantly, my first thought was to look into Stanislavski and what he has to say specifically about imagination and how that will help me develop my abilities to improvise and to just be in the moment. And one of the things he spoke about is focus and concentration, and that the ability to focus and to concentrate are fundamental for any actors. It's imperative to always be ready for the next now. In a scene, there are 20 different nows. In an exercise, you think one thing's going to happen and something else happens. So you always have to be on the ball. You always have to be ready. And you can be having fun in an exercise, but there has to be a continual level of concentration and control so that you can always be ready for what's about to come. Another thing that I found, and this was one of the things that interested me the most, is about observation. So Stanislavski, you've got focus, observation, and retention, and the objective of this is to be able to develop the ability to observe precisely, remember, and then reproduce. One of the exercises that that goes into it is, so you're in a class and you have a table and there are a bunch of different objects on the table, but they're all laid out in a specific way, and you ask 5 or 6 people to come and take a look at the table and the objects, and then you ask them to leave the room or to turn around, and you change where the objects are and you ask them to put it back they first saw it. I can see how this is a useful technique in terms of forcing people to be focused and forcing them to be extremely observant. However, I think in terms of observation, an exercise that would be really helpful for me is having to sit and tell someone about a stranger that you saw out, or something that happened, and about 2 or 3 different people even, or 2 or 3 different things, and why you were interested by it, what about them, what were they wearing, what were they saying, what were their mannerisms, characteristics. And that really struck me, because me sitting here now couldn't name anything. I couldn't name you one thing. And I spend most of my days out. So that showed me that I'm really quite self-indulgent and not very observant of the life that's going on around me and outside of me, which for an actor, I'm actually doing myself a huge disservice, because that's what I'm going to replicate. That's where my inspiration is. It's all out there, but I'm always just here. And so, having actually come across that, I've also come to the realization that I need to get myself a notepad, and every day, or as often as possible, write about 2 or 3 different people or things that have caught my attention, because in the long run that will help me with my imagination, because I'll always have something to think about, to look back on. That's where my inspiration is, and it will give me a speed, because it will be right there. And if it's not in my book, then I might remember it because I wrote it down, and it will mean that I'll always be able to bring something different to a character. Now, both of these exercises that I've spoken about are really useful, but they also allow someone like me to spend a lot of time on them. But however, as an actor, I need to be able to develop a capacity for being swift and spontaneous and having responses to any given task, which is actually why the ball game, although it scared me and I wasn't very good at it at the beginning, it's why it is such a good game, because it forced me to think quick and to be on my feet and to think fast and to just go with the flow, which I don't usually do, because I like to have things a certain way. But actually, this idea of thinking fast does link quite nicely to the teachings of Uta Hagen, of immediacy. I found that I myself have become far too comfortable with planning ahead and thinking about what might happen next and what my next move will be, and all of this prevents my arrival to immediacy, because I've already planned for my actions and their consequences. Uta Hagen actually suggests that in order to isolate the problem of anticipation and search for immediacy of a moment, to go from theory to practice with an exercise, and this exercise is to try and find something that you've either lost or have misplaced. This sort of exercise would allow me to become more aware of what my body does naturally and the changes that take place in it if such a situation were to arise. She said that it's important to not preconceive or shape the psychological or emotional effect of your inability to find the object or the moment of discovery, because if I do, then I'm no longer in the moment, and any feelings that I may have of relief or joy or anger of finally finding the object would just be falsified and completely untrue. So if I was doing such an exercise, my fears would impact me quite a bit, because if I were to do something that was uncommon when looking for the object, or that someone typically wouldn't do, that I might look really stupid again. But actually it's quite reassuring and very informing to see that Uta Hagen believes that as long as my irrational or idiotic behaviour is discovered rather than planned, that I don't need to eliminate it from my score, but rather give it a human cause. And I can and hope to apply this to my future in acting, especially when it comes to being in the moment. So in terms of the issues I've faced, I've realised that trusting my intuition is incredibly important, and this is only backed up by the work of Viola Spolin. She was the creator of theatre games, and which was the very first improvisational training system, which was responsible for starting the improvisational movement in America. Viola said that the purpose of the games is to transcend the thinking process and knock on the door of intuition. Her son and director Paul Sills believed that intuition is where true genius lies. He was explaining, I think it was to the cast of SNL at the time, that an actor should never ever be afraid of going for the unknown and that from following this unknown, new and foreign things will arise within yourself that you couldn't possibly explain, and that's where the magic truly happens. Something that did strike me though when finding out more about Viola is her take on memory, and how actually she believes that we don't need it in terms of improvisation. One of her students, Valerie Harper, explained that Viola taught her that we don't need memory, but rather that we need to open up and to allow the muse to follow. This was quite shocking to me because after having studied Stanislavski and his work, emotional memory is a key part to his system. But I think in terms of improvisation here, Spolin is correct. Her theory makes the most sense to me, because there's almost a forceful nature of just being thrown in at the deep end and having to do it and having no qualms about it, and not having to sit there and just think and think and think and think. And that follows up with the immediacy of things and just going for it. I then started to have a look into some of her games, and I can actually see how they would benefit my improvisational skills and my willingness to let go. So one of the games is the one-word story that we've actually done in class, and something that was said about. So the one-word story game is to enhance impulse to respond instantly. Viola said, "Do not be concerned if a student seems to be straying far from your idea of what should be happening to him or her. When students trust the scene and have pleasure in what they are doing, they will give up the bond that keep them from release and full response." And actually, I say that quote because it relates to me massively, because I did the opposite. I remember doing this in class, and because the story wasn't going exactly how I had it in my head, I got frustrated. But actually, it was my unwillingness to open up and allow the story to go wherever other people wanted it to go that was troubling me. And since then, I've definitely learned that it's okay that the story isn't going the way you saw it in your head, because it will get to where it needs to go. Another one of Spolin's games was called the contrapuntal argument A, B, and C. So basically this argument is, so you have the players and they begin an argument, and the argument is going on simultaneously, and what each person has to do is they both have to develop and keep unfolding their own argument, and they can't pause. And it's the object for each player to avoid letting the other one interrupt their argument. And the way you score it is that depending on how often a player stops, you are not allowed to say yes or no. If you don't properly unfold your point of view, you get scored down for all of that. This, I feel, would be a really good exercise for someone like me who does find it difficult to think on her feet all the time and think really fast, because I'm not allowed to stop. I have to keep going, and I can't just make wishy-washy points. They have to be good, foolproof points that would almost make the other person want to be quiet and listen to what I've got to say about the argument. So yeah, Spolin's definitely someone who I take great pleasure in looking at her work, because I feel more than anyone, she will, more than anything, her attitude to just sort of go for it is really, really lovely. All in all, I believe that in order for me to improve my improvisational skills and allow myself to live and just be in the moment, Spolin's intuition, Stanislavski's take on imagination, and Uta Hagen's belief on immediacy are the key. As Uta Hagen would say, I must exercise my craft through the glorious freedom to fail, daring to try and to risk.